A wise man should be able to carry his happiness within himself. These words from Diogenes of Sinope, uttered over 2,000 years ago, cut through our modern delusions with the precision of a surgeon's blade. You were raised in a world that taught you to bleed for love, to win a woman's heart to prove your worth, to believe that the chase is noble and that longing makes you human. But what if this game, this pursuit, this elaborate fantasy was designed to break you? What if you've been paying for a lie with your time, your pride, your very soul? Diogenes walked barefoot through the filth of Athens. He slept in a barrel and lit his lantern in broad daylight, claiming to search for an honest man. While other philosophers wrote elegant treatises on ethics and the heavens, Diogenes spat at convention and pointed his scorn at men enslaved by desire. He saw something that most men today still refuse to see, that outsourcing your happiness to another person's approval is not love, it's voluntary imprisonment. You chase women not out of love but out of absence. You think you're running toward affection, but you're just running from yourself. When Diogenes saw a young man blush in the presence of a beautiful woman, he didn't congratulate him or encourage his pursuit. He shouted, "Don't be ashamed. The fault is not yours, but nature's, for making such creatures irresistible to fools. You think your hunger is romantic, he called it pathetic. You think your pursuit makes you strong. He saw it as weakness cloaked in perfume." This video will not comfort you with platitudes or reinforce the cultural programming that keeps you chasing validation. Instead, I offer you something far more valuable, a glimpse into the mind of history's most liberated man, a philosopher who understood that freedom begins not when someone chooses you, but when you stop needing to be chosen. If you feel a resistance rising within you already, if these words scrape against your deepest beliefs about what it means to be a man, then you are exactly where you need to be. Stay with me until the end, and you might discover that the path to becoming the man you were meant to be doesn't lead toward her, but toward yourself. And if this perspective already resonates with something long buried inside you, subscribe to continue this journey of uncovering the truth beneath your conditioning. Diogenes urinated in public. He masturbated in the marketplace. When people gasped in horror, he replied, "If only rubbing my stomach would cure hunger too, why not?" He didn't lack shame. He wanted to expose yours. Your shame is the leash they fasten to your manhood. You hide your impulses not to master them, but to appear acceptable to the women you chase. You play the gentleman not because it is virtuous, but because it increases your chances of being chosen. You wear masks. Diogenes burned masks. You build pedestals. He smashed them with ridicule. You walk into rooms scanning for beauty. Diogenes walked into rooms scanning for idiots, and more often than not, he found them in the faces of men like you, desperate, eager, dressed like peacocks hoping for scraps of attention. "I threw away my cup," he once said, "when I saw a child drinking from his hands." He stripped his life down to the bone, while you decorate your cage, chasing silk when you haven't even mastered steel. The chase itself is the first and most dangerous illusion. Society has convinced you that pursuing a woman proves your worth, that persistence demonstrates character, that sacrifice equals devotion. But Diogenes would ask, what man of value bends himself into unrecognizable shapes just to be approved of? What sovereign being spends his precious life force trying to convince another that he is worthy of attention? The pursuer has already conceded his power before the game even begins. Look at your own behavior with unflinching honesty. You check your phone compulsively for her messages. You craft texts with surgical precision, weighing every word, every emoji. You alter your opinions, your appearance, your very essence to increase the odds of her approval. You convince yourself this is romance, but it's really fear. Fear that without her validation, you might discover the emptiness where your self-worth should be. Diogenes had no such fear. When Alexander the Great, ruler of the known world, found Diogenes sunbathing and asked, "What can I do for you?" Diogenes didn't kneel, didn't flatter, didn't pretend to be impressed. He simply said, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." That is power. That is freedom. That is the man who does not chase. But you chase women like they are sunlight. You orbit them like planets starved of heat. You shape yourself according to their moods, their words, their whims. You cut pieces of yourself off to fit inside their desires, and then you call it love. Diogenes would call it slavery, not because women enslave you, but because you walked into the chains yourself, smiling with a bouquet in hand. And until you recognize the nature of these chains, you will continue to mistake them for the path to fulfillment. The most beautiful woman in the world is nothing without character, and character is nothing without truth. These words cut through the perfumed fantasies that society sells to men desperate for connection. The truth that Diogenes would force you to face is this: most of what you call love is just your fear of being alone dressed in poetry. Most of what you give is not generosity but negotiation. You hand her your time, your energy, your ambition, in hopes that she will give you back a reflection of your worth. That is not love. That is a trade, a transaction dressed in roses. And when the trade fails, when she grows cold, when she stops replying, when she loves you less, the more you love her, you are devastated. But not because you lost her. You're devastated because you lost the only mirror that made you feel like a man. Diogenes needed no mirror. He faced the world as it was. No flattery, no false hope, no perfume on decay. He called out the lies until the world had to either laugh or rage, because nothing makes people more angry than being forced to see clearly. Every time you pretend to be more interested in her mundane stories than you actually are, every time you hide your true opinions to avoid conflict, every time you perform the role of the perfect understanding man, you are not building connection. You are constructing a prison. A prison where the real you suffocates slowly while a hollow performance walks the world collecting validation that never satisfies the man inside. The bill for this masquerade always comes due. Either she eventually sees through the performance and loses respect for the actor, or worse, you forget who you are beneath the role you've played for so long. Diogenes lived naked in every sense. Not just physically, though he was known to discard conventional clothing, but emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. He hid nothing, softened nothing, apologized for nothing. "Other dogs bite only their enemies," he once said, "whereas I bite also my friends in order to save them." His honesty wasn't cruelty, it was the highest form of respect, respecting another enough to show them truth rather than comfortable illusions. But you have been taught that love means protection from truth, that connection requires the suppression of your authentic nature. The most insidious cost of the masks we wear is not that they fail to win her lasting affection, it's that they disconnect us from ourselves. With each accommodation, each carefully curated text message, each strategic display of vulnerability calibrated for maximum appeal, the distance grows between who you are and who you pretend to be. Eventually, you become a stranger to yourself, unable to distinguish between your genuine desires and the performance that has become second nature. Is it any wonder, then, that despite all your efforts, the connection you seek remains elusive? How can someone truly connect with you when you yourself have lost access to the man beneath the mask? When Alexander the Great stood before Diogenes, who was lounging in the sun, the ruler of the known world asked, "What can I do for you?" It was a moment that crystallizes everything we've been discussing. The most powerful man alive, offering his resources to a homeless philosopher. Power seeking to demonstrate itself through giving, authority looking for acknowledgement. In that moment, Alexander was the pursuer, seeking validation from the one man who refused to be impressed. And what did Diogenes do? He didn't ask for gold or land or influence. He didn't seek to leverage the opportunity for advancement. He simply said, "Stand out of my sunlight." In that response is a power that no amount of pursuing can ever match. The power of a man who wants nothing, who cannot be purchased, flattered, or manipulated. A man who, in his barrel with his few possessions, was freer than the emperor of the world. Alexander himself is said to have remarked, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." This is the paradox that the modern man must understand. True power comes not from chasing, but from standing still. Not from acquiring, but from needing less. Not from being chosen, but from the capacity to walk away. You've been told that pursuit demonstrates desire, that effort proves love, that persistence eventually wins the prize. But watch what happens when you stop chasing. Not as a manipulative strategy to make her chase you instead, but as a genuine reclamation of your own center. When you stand firmly in your value, when you make your happiness independent of her responses, when you refuse to contort yourself to fit her changing moods, something remarkable happens. The dynamic shifts entirely. No longer are you the orbiting planet desperate for warmth. You become your own sun. And here's the truth society doesn't want you to discover. This shift doesn't repel the feminine. it magnetically attracts it. Not because you're playing games, but because authentic masculine presence, uncompromised by neediness, is the rarest and most compelling force in a world of pursuers. Diogenes didn't pursue because he had nothing to prove. He didn't chase because he wasn't running from himself. When asked about his lack of possessions, he reportedly pointed to the sun and said, "Do you see that great and shining object, the sun? Even that has no chance of remaining static. It too is always moving and changing. So why would I wish my tiny portion to remain unaltered?" This is the liberation that awaits when you stop the endless chase. Not a static perfection, but a dynamic authenticity that flows with life rather than grasping desperately at fleeting validation. In the next section, we'll explore how most men mistake crumbs for feasts and why this keeps them trapped in cycles of pursuit that never satisfy. You hear the word love, and your heart skips. Even after all the disappointment, all the letdowns, all the unanswered texts and unreciprocated effort, you still want it. Because deep inside, you still believe that somewhere out there is a woman who will make it all make sense, one who will redeem the others, one who will see you, finally, as you are, and not leave. But Diogenes would glare through you and say, "You have become addicted to hope, and hope is the bait they use to tame you." That's what makes the chase so lethal. Not that it fails, but that it gives you just enough to keep you moving. A smile here, a compliment there, a late-night conversation that flirts with intimacy but delivers nothing. And you bite again and again, not because you're weak, but because you were trained to respond to breadcrumbs like they were feasts. Every time she gives you just a little, you imagine the whole. You build futures off fragments. You mistake interest for commitment, attention for affection, curiosity for care, and you keep showing up, bringing your best self, your honest self, your loyal self, and leaving with less than you came with. You drain yourself chasing something that was never promised, and you call that effort, you call it devotion. But Diogenes would call it delusion. He once said, "I do not possess, so I am not possessed." Understand this. The more you invest in a woman who hasn't earned it, the more she owns you. Not maliciously, not even consciously, but power doesn't need to be intentional to be real. She controls your thoughts, your moods, your sense of self simply by being the one you cannot stop thinking about. And while you dream of her, what dreams die inside you? While you refresh her last seen status, what dreams go unseen inside your own soul? You give your attention to her mystery, her silence, her unpredictability. But when will you turn that attention inward? When will you face the parts of you that made this chase feel like purpose? Because chasing her isn't about her, it's about escaping yourself. She is the mirage that lets you avoid the desert within. And that's why it hurts so much when she disappears. Because when she's gone, the silence is no longer hers. It's yours. If you've felt the power of these words so far, if they've touched something deep within you that recognizes their truth, consider subscribing to this channel. Our community is dedicated to men who are ready to stop living from the outside in and start building themselves from the inside out. Now, let's examine how the man who stops chasing discovers a power that the pursuer can never know. Diogenes didn't run from silence. He lived in it. He filled it with laughter, with truth, with defiance. He barked like a dog not to entertain but to expose. He made people uncomfortable because he wanted to show them how much of their lives were performance. And that's what chasing women is. Performance. You become an actor in your own life, and the more you chase, the more disconnected you become from the man beneath the mask. You want her to see you, but you don't even see yourself. You want her to admire you, but you despise yourself every time you bend, soften, shrink, hoping she'll stay. And when she leaves, you break, not because she broke you, but because you gave her something fragile and hoped she'd protect it. You handed her your self-worth like a glass sculpture and said, "Please don't drop this." But she was never trained to hold you. She was just passing by. That's what Diogenes knew. The world owes you nothing. Not comfort, not clarity, and certainly not love. He lived like a ghost in plain sight, unimpressed by beauty, unafraid of rejection, unbothered by status. While other men gathered in temples and courtyards to impress women and gain favor, Diogenes was digging in the dirt for simplicity. Not because he lacked options, but because he had no appetite for illusions. You hunger for illusion. You think if you play the role well enough, long enough, she'll choose you. But the truth is, the longer you perform, the more she forgets who you are. And one day, when she finally turns away, she won't be leaving you. she'll be leaving the mask you wore. And you'll stand there, hollow, wondering if you ever existed at all. But you did. You do. And that's what Diogenes wants you to see. Not in her eyes, not in her arms, but in yourself, in your breath, in your ability to stand alone without applause, without attention, without the warm blanket of feminine approval. Because that is where your freedom begins. There comes a moment in a man's life, maybe after another unanswered message, maybe after watching her laugh in someone else's arms, when the pain becomes too familiar. Not sharp, not violent, but dull, lingering. The ache of realization that you were never in control, that all your effort was a ritual, that you weren't choosing, you were begging to be chosen. Diogenes would have grabbed you by the collar, not to scold you, but to wake you up. He lived among dogs not because he loved filth, but because dogs don't pretend. A dog doesn't chase what doesn't want to be caught. A dog doesn't build his identity around rejection. Diogenes believed that to live without pretending, that was the height of virtue. And every time you shapeshift to win a woman's affection, you are pretending. Every time you dim your truth to appear acceptable, you are lying, not to her, but to yourself. He was once asked what he considered the most beautiful thing in the world. He replied, "Freedom of speech." And yet here you are, censoring your thoughts, biting your tongue, softening your tone, fearing that if you say what you really think, she'll disappear. That's not love. That's captivity. You fear walking away. You fear silence. You fear rejection. Diogenes feared nothing, because he owned nothing, not even the illusion that someone else could define his worth. You, on the other hand, have built your whole identity like a sculpture made of borrowed parts. A little charm here, a little vulnerability there, a line borrowed from a movie, a gesture copied from a man who once got her attention. But here's the raw truth no one tells you. If she didn't want you when you were silent, she doesn't deserve you when you're singing. You have made your life a stage. And for what? A fleeting glance? A promise that changes with the wind? She doesn't even know what she wants, but somehow you've made her the judge, jury, and executioner of your masculinity. Diogenes would have pissed on that altar. He understood something eternal, that the man who doesn't chase is not alone. He is sovereign. That the man who walks away is not rejected. He is choosing. That to be unseen by her is not a curse, but a test. Will you see yourself now that she won't? You say you miss her, but what you miss is the permission she gave you to feel worthy. You miss the mirror, not the person. Because if you really loved her, you'd love her even in her absence. And if you really loved yourself, you'd never need her to reflect that back. She is not your beginning, and she should not be your end. The beginning is the moment you stop running. The moment you sit like Diogenes in the sun and say, "I have nothing, I need nothing, I am enough." Not in arrogance, not in bitterness, but in liberation. Let her choose. Let her go. Let her love someone else. That is not your death. That is your unveiling. The shedding of the false man who thought he had to earn everything with pain. The death of the boy who thought love had to be won through sacrifice. Diogenes didn't sacrifice, he simply refused to kneel. And that, my brother, is the lesson. Do not kneel. Not for beauty, not for belonging, not for the myth of completion. Stand. Stand in your hunger. Stand in your solitude. Stand in the unbearable clarity of knowing that no woman, no matter how soft her voice, how warm her touch, how deep her gaze, will ever complete a man who hasn't faced himself. She can join you. She can walk beside you, but she cannot rescue you from yourself. That is your burden and your freedom. So burn the script. Kill the chase. Abandon the altar. Let her go. Because once you stop chasing, you'll realize you were never chasing her. You were chasing a version of yourself that never needed to chase at all. And that man, he's been waiting for you the whole time. When was the last time you sat in silence without reaching for your phone? When was the last time you made a decision based solely on what you wanted, not on how it might be perceived by others? When was the last time you felt complete without external validation? These are not rhetorical questions. These are the gateways to your liberation. The chase has consumed so much of your life force that you've forgotten how to simply be. Diogenes was once captured by pirates and put up for sale in the slave market. When asked what he could do, he replied, "Govern men." He then pointed to a man wearing purple robes and said, "Sell me to that man. He needs a master." Even in chains, he knew himself to be free because his value came from within. Even facing humiliation, he stood in his truth. This is the foundation you must build, a sense of self so solid that it doesn't crumble when she doesn't text back, when she chooses someone else, when she fails to see your worth. Building this inner value isn't about becoming perfect or impenetrable. It's about becoming real. It's about stripping away the performances and the people-pleasing and the desperate need for approval that has governed so much of your behavior. It's about asking yourself the questions you've been avoiding. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually want? Not what have I been told to want? What parts of myself have I abandoned in the endless pursuit of being chosen? There is a particular kind of courage required to stand alone. Not the dramatic courage of grand gestures, but the quiet courage of self-sufficiency. Diogenes exemplified this when he was seen drinking water from his cupped hands. He immediately threw away his cup, saying, "A child has beaten me in simplicity." His courage wasn't in facing danger, but in facing himself, in constantly examining what was truly necessary and what was merely conventional. You fear being alone because you have been taught that solitude equals failure, that a man without a woman is somehow incomplete, unproven, possibly defective. This fear drives you into relationships that diminish you, keeps you in situations that drain you, pushes you to chase women who have clearly shown they don't value you. But what if being alone isn't the catastrophe you've been led to believe? What if it's the very soil in which your authentic self can finally take root and grow? Diogenes chose his solitude. He wasn't alone by default, but by design. He understood that freedom sometimes requires an emptying, a clearing away of distractions and dependencies that cloud your vision and weaken your resolve. The chase keeps you perpetually externally focused, constantly scanning the horizon for validation, for approval, for the next hit of feminine attention that might temporarily soothe the ache of disconnection from yourself. When you finally stop chasing, the initial silence can be terrifying. Without the constant drama of pursuit and rejection, without the dopamine hits of her occasional attention, you're left with just yourself. And that's when the real work begins. That's when you must face the void you've been running from, the emptiness that no woman, no matter how beautiful or attentive, could ever fill. Because that void isn't a lack of feminine energy in your life. It's a lack of connection to your own masculine essence. In that void, in that silence, in that aloneness, that's where you'll find what you've been looking for all along. Not in her smile, not in her validation, not in her body, but in your capacity to stand complete within yourself, to know your value, not because someone reflects it back to you, but because you have finally, truly seen yourself. This is the gift of standing alone, not isolation, but integration, not loneliness, but wholeness, not the absence of connection, but the presence of the most important connection of all, the one with yourself. There comes a moment of awakening in a man's life when he finally sees the chase for what it is, not a path to fulfillment, but a distraction from his own emptiness. When he recognizes that he hasn't been pursuing love at all, but running from the parts of himself he's afraid to face. This awakening isn't comfortable. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or instant liberation. It often comes in the quiet aftermath of another rejection, another disappointment, another relationship that promised everything and delivered nothing. Diogenes would tell you that this moment of painful clarity is not your breaking point. It's your starting point, the beginning of a life lived on your own terms, not as a reaction to feminine approval or disapproval. The Greek word autarkia, which Diogenes valued above all else, translates roughly to self-sufficiency, not just materially, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. The capacity to generate your own approval, your own sense of worth, your own reason for being. When you stop chasing, you don't stop living, you don't stop connecting, you don't even stop loving, but you start doing all these things from a place of fullness rather than lack, from choice rather than need, from sovereignty rather than desperation. And paradoxically, this is when genuine connection becomes possible, not because you've learned better techniques of pursuit, but because you're no longer pursuing at all. You're simply being in your full, authentic power and allowing others to be drawn to that authenticity rather than to your performance. The man who stops chasing discovers something that the eternal pursuer never will, that his value was never dependent on being chosen in the first place, that the validation he sought externally was always available internally, that the love he thought he needed from her was actually the love he needed to give himself. And in that discovery is freedom beyond anything Diogenes could have articulated, the freedom to love without losing yourself, to connect without compromising your truth, to walk through the world not as a hunter desperate for prey, but as a complete being, self-contained, self-approved, truly alive. If this message has resonated with you, if it has awakened something long buried beneath layers of societal conditioning, subscribe to our channel. Share your journey in the comments below. Join our community of men who are choosing freedom over fantasy, authenticity over approval, and self-mastery over the endless, exhausting chase. The real journey begins now, not toward her, but toward yourself.